to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And could we have a roll call starting to my right?
Here's Martin.
Jeff Sickmeyer.
Mark Beadle.
Eric Arnold.
Ruth Ann.
And we have the minutes from our October 18th, 2021 meeting. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve? Or are there any revisions or changes?
I didn't see anything. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from October 18th, 2021.
I'll second.
First and a second, no comments as far as revisions or changes? No? Everyone in favor, please answer audibly. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Reports and recommendations.
We do have a report tonight. That is the Bargersville Recreation Impact Fee Study update. I'll toss the reins over to the town's consultant, Chuck Lehman, to give a presentation. And this will be a public hearing as well, so.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and since it is going to be a public hearing, anybody who's going to speak either on this subject on the public hearing or the next one regarding Sundown Gardens Development Plan, I would just like to swear everybody in really quick and then we'll be done with that process. So anybody who's planning on speaking, it's perfectly fine, but if you could please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth?
I do. I do.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Good evening. My name is Chuck Lehman. I'm president of Lehman & Lehman. We're landscape architects and planners out of Mishawaka. We were privileged to work with the town in 2017 on establishing the town's first recreation impact fee study. The state statute requires that this is updated every 5 years, and we are in that process. And what's before you tonight is that 2021 study. I've provided hard copies of the actual study and the presentation for tonight's meeting. We did meet with the Park Advisory Commission Board before this meeting. They provided a favorable recommendation to the Plan Commission and also the Town Council for this recreational impact fee update. I will go through this. If you have questions as I go through, make sure that you stop me and we'll address them. The impact fee statute requires that a recreational impact fee advisory committee be formed. That makeup needs to have representation from the development community, the building, housing building community, and also the real estate. The members of that committee are noted at the top of this slide, and I'd like to publicly thank them for their efforts in this. We did meet physically one time, and then we had a correspondence along the way. The recreation impact fee calculations actually works from the standpoint where you define the impact cost over this next 10-year period. You subtract from that any non-local revenues, which are basically donations, and then any impact deductions, which I'll show you how that was calculated, and therefore any current deficiencies are actually make up part of that impact deduction. You take that number, divide it by the 10-year projected residential building permits, and that determines your recreation impact fee cost itself. The guidelines and the graphic for this, if you look at, there's two charts or two tables graphics that are illustrated on this slide. The current would represent our current situation, and what's shown here is your current population is weighed against your recreation standards that have been established for the town and also by the advisory committee. And you take that and weight that against your current infrastructure inventory. In this example, it shows that you have more population than you have inventory, so that wedge of orange would represent a current deficiency for that status. What the impact fee study looks at is at 10-year growth projections. So that looks at the next 10 years, so to the year 2020, or excuse me, 2030. And in this case, there will be new population, there will be new housing building permits and so on. And there'll be even additional inventory. But with this illustration here in this graphic, you weight that against the same recreation standards, and that growth caused by that element in the next 10 years, that wedge of green in this case, would be funded completely by impact fee dollars. The growth of Bargersville has been pretty substantial in the last several years. You can see going back to the year 2000, where it was 23 building permits in the year 2000, compared to where it is in 2020, which is 2,000 or 211. So the growth has been pretty exponential in the next. It's also projected to continue that pace for the next several years as well. Part of the process is that we looked at the development parcels within the town limits. We looked at, again, we kept the same parcels that we identified back in 2017. Some of those parcels have actually converted themselves into actual developments, which we've outlined in white in this case here. But we did go through each of those parcels and broke them down in detail as it relates to what their growth potential is. There's a database that's associated with this. And again, this table may be too small to see, but each of those parcels has an identifier to it. It also has an acreage. We discount any like floodplain and that type of thing. So we have an accurate development acres in each of those parcels. We utilize the town zoning to determine the density of residential development that could possibly take shape on that. We then do a projection of what that build out for each of those parcels would actually be. This is just a portion of that database. The full database is in the actual study itself. We also take a look at existing developments that have developed over the last several years. Some of these still had capacity for continuation of development. Some were brand new that had 100% capacity that could be developed. We've acknowledged on both of these tables, both the parcel development and the actual residential development, a projection of percentage of how much of that either development or those parcels would be developed in that next 10-year period. And those numbers are highlighted in the blue column in this case. The summary of that basically is illustrated in this table. Currently, the 2020 population for Bargersville is 9,560, according to the census. We're looking at growth of parcel development and also the existing developments of a growth of additional 5,650 persons, or 2,085 building permits. So what is projected for the population in the year 2030 would be 15,210. Interesting, if you look at 100% build out of everything else on that plan, it'd be the third column over, and that bottom build out would be 28,107. What we've done in this chart is then project that growth over that 10-year period on an annual basis. So you can see that we're taking the total of 2,085 total and then breaking that down on an annual basis of growth in that time period. What that average works up to be is 4.75% growth on an annual basis. So that determines our population forecast. The park development, the park infrastructure itself, this would represent the park acreage. Currently, if you take into account the existing developments and the park land, along with the trails and greenways, it adds up to be a total of 29.2 acres of land. That's currently as part of that current level of service. And that graphic would just represent the type of park projects or park acres that make up the system. What we look at beyond just the acreage is about 35 different recreational infrastructure components of ball fields, of trails, of playgrounds, and so on. And we document what is in the existing parks. We also document what's in the schools within the area, study area, and also what other recreation providers provide for that. But keep in mind that the impact fee study only looks at what is being provided within the park system itself by the municipality of the town. We also then studied and we reviewed the level of service that we would desire for Bargersville. We've done several of these throughout the state, and this would represent a graphic or a table showing what other communities have for various recreation standards from that. It's not to say that we use that we want to model exactly after another municipality or another town or city, but it is always interesting to look at that comparison just to people's perceptions of those various communities and what feels good and feels adequate. This is another way to look at that through that level of service. One of the bigger changes that we looked at in of those 35 different recreational components, in the last impact fee study, there was only 2 that actually went into the recreation formula, and that was trails and also park acres. It's the recommendation of this update study that we continue with just those 2 infrastructure components in this study. But one of the major changes, we did change the level of service for both of those. When we presented this last time, we looked at the park acres, for example, and even today with today's standards, if you look at the level of service that you're provided with those 29.2 acres of park acreage serving your current population, that works out to be only 2.91 acres per 1,000 people, which is, in comparison throughout other communities throughout the state, is woefully missing as far as capacity on that. At the last impact fee study, we looked at a community level of service standard of 5 acres per 1,000, and that's what went into that calculation. What we're recommending and what the committee is recommending is a new level of service of 8 acres per 1,000 people. And that would, if you look at the bottom portion of this table, you're using that 8 acres per 1,000, you would have a current deficiency of 51.1 acres of land, but a future need, which could be funded completely by impact fees, of 92.48 acres of land. So this would greatly increase the level of service as it relates to that. Now, some people may ask, well, why don't we consider ball fields and some of these other components for that? It may be a priority, but you still need to have land to put those ball fields on. So the idea is, as growth continues throughout the community, strategically, it'd be to the wise decision for the town to actually designate and denote locations where park acreage would be ideal to be located for those future population, that future growth. So this was one major component on that. Excuse me. The other was trails, and the trail component, the next slide. The trail component, if you see at the very bottom, is somewhat hidden by that table on the top. In the last study, we looked at 1 mile of trail for every 2,000 persons. The committee wanted that to be raised a little bit, so we raised that to 1 mile of trail for every 1,750 people in that new standard. So those are the 2 changes that we made on that, and it was part of that recommendation going forward on that. Part of the study, we looked at what the cost for all those 35 different components would be. Again, the bottom 2 that's shaded in gray would be what was going to be going into the impact fee study or the calculations. Excuse me, and that was designated as a priority. So in the yellow line down below, that would represent a current deficiency of $1.67 million, but a future need of $3.39 million in the year 2030. So those were the components that went into that. We looked at individually what each of those line items would mean as far as if each line item was an impact fee itself. If you take a look at the very bottom, it'd be those two components again. I think I got it summarized in a larger table here. But here would represent that of the current deficiencies with the trails, there'd be $140,000 of current deficiencies of trails, future need of trails of 624. In the park open space acres, there'd be a current deficiency of 1.5 million, but a future need of 2.77 million. You can see in that fifth column over the magenta colored thing, the impact fee in the gross status would represent $1,630 as far as impact fee recommendation. Those last two columns would represent the ratio on that. Typically, we always look at the ratio. You don't want to, in this, what this is saying is, if you look at that green line, you would be paying 33 cents in order to get 67 cents back. So the return on that investment, you want to make sure that you're not underwater on that, what the town's portion of that is. So these two kind of match that criteria and is worthy of consideration. The other thing that we looked at is where part of the state statute is required where the current deficiencies are going to be funded and how they're going to be funded. We looked at several different funding sources. We identified 4 that we're considering on this. For the trails and pathways, we'd be looking at grants and also park capital improvement budget. And then for the park open space acres, it would be grants, the park capital improvement budget, along with the town's economic development fund, along with TIF monies that could be used for that. So that's how the funding would be forecast and where those funding sources would be. Part of the elements of the formula is to determine what the impact deductions would be. And basically what the statute requires is that the new folks coming in that are paying the impact fee are exempt from funding anything as related to those current deficiencies. So we need to exempt them up front. And this is basically the calculations to figure out how that exemption takes place. Without getting into a lot of detail, calculations basically you see in that last column and the last line, the red number of there would be an impact deduction of $103,382 discounted from the impact cost. That basically is carried over into this recommendation here. So in that middle table, you see that there's a population in 2030 of 15,210. That expected number of residential building permits in that 10-year period would be 2,085. The impact cost before any deductions would be the 3.9 million. There'd be no identified local revenues and non-local revenues. And the impact deduction would be that $103,000 so that the adjusted future impact cost would be $3.29 million. Take that number and divide it by the number of building permits, which is 2,085. That comes up with a recommendation of an impact fee of $1,580. As an option to this, many communities consider some type of a housing equivalent. This table at the bottom of this slide illustrates what that housing equivalent calculations would be. This was something that was part of your current recreation impact fee ordinance. And basically, this is identifying a breakdown on the type of housing permits that would be coming in. For example, the single-family residence would be at that full 100% level of that 1580. As it relates to things like the two-family, that would be 95% of that total, or $1,501. Or apartments could actually be broken down by number of bedrooms per apartment. For example, the one-bedroom apartment would be recognizing at 65% of the 100%, or an impact fee of $1,027. And again, this was something that was carried over into the last, from the last ordinance itself. The next slide illustrates what we have as our understanding of the most current municipal impact fee, recreation impact fee study, or elements within the various communities throughout the state. The average of I think the highest one is Carmel, which is $2,981. The average of those listed above are $1,346, and again, the recommendation for Bargersville would be that $1,580. The recommendation summary is that we would be looking at one impact fee zone that would be established, which would be the town limits. There would be applying just the A priorities that goes into the impact fee calculation, which would be for trails and parkland. There'd be a current deficiencies that would have to be funded over the next 10 years of 1.67 million. The future need would be that with the discount would be 3.295 million. And then that would give a calculation of an impact fee of $1,580. It's recommended, many communities have applied an annual inflation or cost of materials rate increase. So the recommendation is to include a 3% adjusting on an annual basis of that impact fee dollar amount. And that we again consider the housing equivalent option that was projected a little bit ago, and that there would be an annual report of the revenues and the expenditures given on an annual basis on the annual reporting to the town. This was an additional element that was added to that as compared to the 2017 data as it relates to the 2021 study. You can see that the percentage there and the dollar amount. The impact fee that we had in the 2017 was $748 per residential building permit. And what's recommended in this study is the $1,580. I think that was it. This does follow all the guidelines that BAGI, which is the Building Association for Greater Indianapolis, that we followed and matched all their criteria as far as what impact fee study would cover. And I think that is it. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. From there.
You had mentioned at the beginning that you had copies of this presentation for us.
Yep. I don't know where they are. There's a box here somewhere.
Oh, I got it.
I got both the hard copy, which is bound, and also this presentation in a stapled copy.
Bible slides are in there.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the opportunity for the commission members to ask the petitioner any questions.
So my question is on the rate at which new builds, and part of it's more maybe for you guys. I saw we estimated 176 in 2021. Look, it's already the middle of November, so we know what the 2021 number is looking like. What are we at for the year? That seems
196.
we've already exceeded the 21 estimate. So my question is are we underestimating the 10-year growth? I don't know. Or maybe there's
no, it's a good question.
Maybe there's rules that require we
No.
have to limit it to a certain percentage.
No, it's a good question. And again, we worked on that. We realize you're at that height point right now. Typically, we start off slow and we always kind of build up. This one was more level than anything else. I think the key element there is what is the bottom line that we're projecting on that. So that 2000, whatever,
80 or something like
85,
it was, yeah.
yeah, is really kind of the goal. How we get there, if you grow faster than that,
If you put 500 in 1 year and,
but in 100 the following year, you're still projecting that bottom number. Good question, though.
And then, obviously, the goal of this funds is to buy property with that.
Buy property and develop
Do
trails.
we have ideas on where we're gonna do this, or is that, am I putting the cart well in front of the horse on that question? Again, more probably for these guys than you, but. Julie's standing up. I got her up out of her seat, excellent.
I'm not gonna put that one on those guys. So exactly what properties those are gonna be, I can't tell you, but I think the 2040 plan contemplates kind of where we would want to look at property. And then as new developments are coming in, those are
Squeezing in around it.
those are discussions that we can have. One of the things that you didn't mention is that developers do have an opportunity if they want to include parkland in their developments,
Okay.
they can donate that and then they could get a credit for that
Okay.
as part of that process. So exactly which piece?
Who is it that would get the credit? The developer or the individual property owner's got to pay that fee?
The individual property owners would pay it, but the developer would get an impact deduction, their credit on that. So in other words, if he donates 20 acres of land, he can take the value of that and basically get a credit by that donation.
The vote would be
But
passive.
But what about the person actually paying for the permit?
It would not be charged with the permit.
It doesn't get charged on that permit.
Okay.
Same thing applies for trails. If they build trails in this part of their trail plan, they build it to the town standards, they can get a credit on that as well.
Haven't done that bookkeeping yet. I have a feeling we might be in the future.
Right.
It seems like trails is kind of a little bit of a separate animal, so to speak, but when it comes to actually park land, how do you measure the population, like the 15,000 population in 2030, by the total available land in the town or the municipality, whatever it might be? I mean, obviously, if somebody lives on 3 acres, their desire for parkland or demand may be less than somebody who lives on 2/10 of an acre.
Sure.
And the way our community is set up right now, there's still a lot of land and there's larger lots. How do you measure that balance when you try to predict what demand might be per person or per 1,000 people?
Sure. And again, like the state developments that have that multiple acres that make up their component. And it could vary, and it's really kind of the complexion of where the municipality feels it needs to be. If you go to that one chart that looks at the various scales of community level service of some of those communities, Valparaiso, for example, has a standard of 20 acres per 1,000. They don't have a lot of estate developments. So it's kind of that balance of that. As the town, as Bargersville grows over the next 5 years, when we come back to study this again, we may determine that, that acreage needs to be modified from that 8 to maybe 9, or maybe it goes back to 7 at this point in time too.
And then how do you measure, I was on the school board for 8 years, and I know the school corporation's been very purposeful as far as the type of properties they buy and the size of facilities. So they have a lot of green space. I mean, we even have that on Walnut Grove. And, some of the new ones, it doesn't seem like we're taking any of that green space into account. Because I talked to the school corporation, and all that land on the southeast corner of Saddle Club and Whiteman Road basically is going to stay green space.
Yeah.
But I guess you don't take any of that into.
The state statute requires that the inventory that we take has to be part of the oversight of the town itself.
Of the actual town.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, we acknowledge that because again, if the school
If
property.
Frisbee team play, I see it all the time.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's a nice green space
Yeah.
for the community.
And if there can be even some type of a local memo of understanding where that could be accessible and used by the community, maybe that brings down that acreage as well.
Okay.
So that would need to be a conversation between the town and the school board.
And again, the other thing that we mentioned the last time, I think it's in this document too, is that the acceptance, say a developer wants to donate 20 acres, it should not be 20 acres of retention basin. It needs to be something.
We've had that conversation. You touched tears on there, with that one.
But it needs to be something that's usable, so, for the town to set some standards of what, to accept anything, what, it has to meet a certain criteria.
Right. You said it's currently 5 acres per thousand now?
Currently, it's 5 acres per thousand now, the current impact fee ordinance.
Would it be useful to actually take into account what we were just describing, all the green space that is actually on somebody's inventory? It's not the town's inventory, but it is in our community, what that number actually is.
See if I have that. We didn't. It would be in that inventory thing. We could take a look at that. And again, it's not going to be anything that's going to impact the dollar amount that was projected, but I think the idea of starting those discussions, say a school site has 40 acres of land, but say 15 of it is really considered that. It would be that discussion of could that 15 acres be something that could be utilized by the town and by some type of working arrangement.
Are you, based on your experience, are you used to seeing joint agreements like that?
There is, and not so much on land, but on maybe use of facilities like a tennis courts. So if typically school facilities are not open the same hours as parks are.
Right.
But there may be, a half-time component to that or something to that extent. We've worked on several communities where it's not necessarily the schools, but if another organization had, say, 20 softball fields and the town itself did not have any softball fields. Well, if you just look at just the town inventory, we need softball fields. Well, those softball fields are being fulfilled by someone else. So that's why wouldn't make a lot of sense to include that in the inventory or in the calculations. Same could apply for that acreage too, of school property or even tennis courts, if we included that. But in this case, in both cases here, we're looking at just trails and acreage at this point. So what we would need to have a little bit more deeper dive would be looking at the acreage relationship.
And I'm just doing the math in my head. If that were to take place, you are increasing the number of effective acres in the inventory, which reduces the future need, which theoretically reduces the impact fee.
It could, but again, you'd have to have some legal review of what that use of those acres would be. If it's not part of your deed of the town, I don't know if the state statute would recognize it as part of your inventory.
So what about, for example, the Center Grove Community, the SAC, which is the indoor track facility? Upstairs, there's a walking track for the community.
Mm-hmm.
Would something like that be counted in here?
Well, not for the trails,
Right.
or not for the two components we're looking at. If we were including a walking trail, which I think is one of the inventory items in here, it would be something that we'd want to take a look at. Again, if it all depends on what the community has as access to.
Well, the community has access to
Yeah.
that.
It's also not within.
It's not, yeah, it's not Bargersville, city limits either. Or town limits, sorry.
Good question.
It's only one of the schools that's actually within the town.
Yeah.
Walnut and
Well,
Maple.
Maple.
Maple Grove is good.
We okay to move forward with the public hearing?
I've still got some questions. The 3% annual increase rate, we had the little sidebar conversation when you put that chart up. I saw that in the information that was shared with the board members. And I just went and looked, what is the average rate of inflation? For the last 10 years, it's 1.7%. For the last 20 years, it's only 2%. So where did you come up with 3?
Let me go to a page in the actual study. Go to page 34. Page 34 actually has a chart and a little narrative that talks about the gross domestic product that actually the Indianapolis the MPO actually has been studying. And this goes back to 2015 is the latest on that. But it ranged anywhere from 5%, it dipped down to say 3.5%, then back up to over 4% in that. Now, again, where we stand today, I don't know. I haven't gotten their latest data on that. 3% has been something that has been used throughout many of the donut communities around Indianapolis. And it was basically one that's been somewhat an acceptance. With the current date and time of where we stand in inflation and the cost of materials, 3% may be grocery low.
Now, you're assuming that what we're experiencing right now is not a blip. It's something that is now baked in. I don't accept that assumption.
Mhm. Again,
It's the difference between consumer price index and GDP for the Indianapolis, Carmel, Anderson area are two very different ways to measure inflation. Those are dramatically different ways of measuring.
Some communities have actually looked at their ordinance in such a way that you review what that inflation rate is for the coming year and you set it accordingly. It doesn't have to be 3% each and every year. It could be something that the ordinance could be flexible enough to have it, but it's got to be something that would make some sense on an annual basis.
Is within the scope for tonight's conversation, presentation, thank you. It's obviously a very thorough study. What we were providing in our board package was not this, it was the language of a proposed ordinance that is in draft form now, where the town council would actually adopt it.
Yeah, no, we got this.
It should have been in your
There
Dropbox.
was a Dropbox. Yeah, I didn't see that. Is the ordinance in scope for tonight?
What would be on the scope for the board would be a resolution which would forward that to the town council.
A resolution is page 9 of your packets.
Yeah, I've got it here. Because I've got a lot of feedback from the actual proposed ordinance. There's typos in this,
Right now, I need to open the public session for any community conversation. Then if we get any, then obviously we need to address that. If we don't, we're certainly going to have an opportunity as commission members to dive even deeper. But from the standpoint of if we have anybody on this, I'd like to open that public hearing if everybody's all right. Okay, I'd like to open the public hearing for, where's my notes? Sorry. The Bargersville Recreation Impact Fee Study Update. If anybody would like to speak on this subject, please come to the podium and give your name and address. Okay. Public hearing is closed. Okay, I have that worked out. Okay, go ahead.
No, I actually don't have further comments on the study itself because it's a remarkable study. My comments are on the draft ordinance. So can we discuss those?
From the legal standpoint.
The ordinance is the town council's to adopt. Your document to adopt is the resolution, which is essentially approving the plan and the fee itself.
That even though there are issues with the actual ordinance, which is what we were given to look at, you're saying that that's out of scope?
I think you are also given the plan commission resolution.
Yeah, I've got it.
Okay.
I understand it.
Yes, it is without of the scope because you're not approving the ordinance, you're approving the resolution.
And the resolution is not tied to the ordinance.
I guess, are your concerns substantive?
The ordinance is identifying, for example, who the members of the review board would be. The ordinance is defining dollar limit for whether somebody can have a payment plan to pay what could be eventually $2,000 or $3,000 fee. I mean, I think that that's substantive.
But the makeup of that resolution, is it for us to determine? The dollar amount, the payment plans and all that?
Not
or is
really,
that council's?
yours is really a yes or no determination, and you're just adopting a resolution that is a lengthy way of saying that, basically. But you're making a recommendation to the town council, and you have a representative from the town council here, so if you would like to give feedback on other items, I mean, it's your meeting.
Yeah, these, the feedback that I have is predominantly on the language of the ordinance. It says one thing in one place and it says something entirely different in another place. That's inconsistencies that need to be dealt with. There's flat out typos. You read it and the word is wrong. That, I understand that is separate from us passing forward a recommendation on our resolution. I do understand that. But ultimately, the town council is going to adopt or not adopt or ask for modifications to something. And I found issues in the actual ordinance. So if that's outside the scope of the plan commission, I can have that conversation with council directly or through the plan commission office and do that. So that's what I'm asking. Is that the right context or is tonight the right context?
I think you can accomplish it either way, but you are not voting on the ordinance, so
Understood.
changes can happen outside of this meeting.
Yeah, understood. I would defer that.
And even what we're seeing in terms of the ordinance could change at the council level as well. I mean, in theory.
In theory.
Understood. Thank you.
Sounds like it needs to change.
No, I mean,
Based on what you're.
we're not going to discuss it tonight, so. Thank you.
Okay, does any members of the commission have any further questions for the petitioner? Whether it's Ms. Young or the consultant? I guess one of my questions, and it might not be able to be answered, but the apartments at Commerce Grove, what would be the estimated impact fee that development would have to pay for that apartment?
Without having the particular breakdown of units, I know they discussed that in some of the rezoning, in the plat applications. But that's going to depend on the bedroom count, I believe.
How many units are there, do we know, estimated?
184?
Sounds right. If I recall right, the majority were one bedroom.
Correct. More than half is what they mentioned.
I think you're right. I think more than half of them are 2 and 3 bedrooms, if I remember right from the
Yeah,
BZA last month.
55 to 60% is at one bedroom, I believe.
You're talking about probably $300,000 on a facility, about like that. Versus the total cost of, how many millions? 10 million? More? 180? 180 units, 184 units, what are they at? What's the, any idea?
Haven't heard.
Average cost per unit on a facility like that?
You probably said that.
10 years, so they have a wage for 10 years.
10 to 13.
The other question I have is,
Crap, was 13 today's. And I feel like more of the 55% was skewed towards the 3 bedrooms, you got 2% of the last year.
Is there a number, is there a percent that you use from a cost of a total, like if a house is going in, do they normally say 1 or 2% or 3% is normally an impact fee?
Of the cost of the house.
I guess it
No,
just,
it's not based on any assessed value or.
it's per unit, so the smaller, the lower the price house, the bigger the impact.
Well, it's, the other way to look at it is that this is looking at the number of users
People,
of
yeah.
recreation.
Yeah, I got it.
It's not the value, I mean, they, one person could live in a single-family house.
Right, I understand, yeah.
A $2 million house is gonna have, with 4 people, is gonna have the same impact as a $200,000 home.
Exactly, because those 4 people are going to use the same facilities as someone in a
And that's per
$100,000.
stellatute to determine it that way?
Correct.
Okay. It's not like we can make up our own rules. Probably gone
So
through
if you're a
it.
senior, for example, and you're on a fixed income and you can't do that, then are there options available for them?
There is an appeal board, if you feel that the fee is applied incorrectly.
But that's not a criteria. The appeal board, and what I read in the ordinance, has a limited scope of what it can actually address. Do you think that you calculated the number wrong? What good does that do? But what Tirza is raising is the actual ability to pay that. So,
Well, in addition to the age of the person, if they'll actually utilize that, like who's being counted?
Let me cite one example of that. Again, this impact fee review board is a 3-member board. It serves like a BZA. If someone has a request for an appeal to a zoning stat or whatever, it's the hearing board for that there. The only of the 35, 40 of these that we've done throughout the state, there's only been one case that I've heard that that review board actually functioned and was utilized. And that was, I think, in Valparaiso, where the petitioner at the time had said that, I'm going to be developing a senior living facility. These people are not going to be using some of the active recreation components that are there. But again, keep in mind that in their case, they were looking at tennis courts, softball fields, baseball diamonds, and besides trails and whatever. So in that case, they did, the review board actually made a recommendation and they modified their housing equivalent, and they added a component of senior living as a percentage. And that was based on, again, it was based on the value of what components were going into their impact fee calculations.
How's it determined of when the impact is charged? Not the timing, but what type of, is it a remodel or is it strictly a new?
It's a new construction. No remodels are affected by this. And again, this is a one-time fee.
Right.
And it's pulled at the same time someone pulls a building permit.
Gotcha.
Is there, I know when we did the road study, or the road fee, there was a waiting period, assuming the timeline goes as follows, this will be signed and if everything is approved, it'll be done by the end of the year. Is it effective 1/1 or do we have a waiting period like we did with the?
You got a
6-month waiting
6 month waiting period. And again, this is timed in such a way that your current ordinance will run out at the end of that, at the beginning of that. So there's no gap.
Gotcha. So even new builds in January will still get something, it'll just be a much smaller dollar amount.
Off the old ordinance. Yep.
Gotcha.
So if the average new build is, in our community is $300,000 to $350,000, it's less than 0.5% from a cost standpoint on the overall cost of a new build.
what about somebody who was living in a mobile home? $1,000 is a whole lot higher percentage.
Where are you gonna put a mobile home at in White River, in Bargersville, based on the building, based on our overlay and our
Where
plans?
did you have them go on part? What do you mean, a new one?
We're still gonna go and put in the new mobile home park in Bargersville. If you find one that's gonna be approved, let me know. I mean, I'm not saying, is even mobile home, would mobile homes count technically?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
But I don't know that
Year
it's.
one,
It could be.
inflated by 3% per year to 2030, so.
at one time, whenever somebody goes in, so.
I don't, but to his point, I don't know that, I don't see that in the future. I could be wrong. Maybe we don't know what the future holds, but
I have no problem with that. Mobile home parks not at risk. I just think that, obviously, the park, that group that's studied it and the need that we have, and whether we're talking about 1,250 or 1,500, I think our community is needed, and
I think by the end, we're only talking about a $500 increase over where it is today. So it's
true. It's $748 to $1,500.
Well, I'm talking about from 21 to 2030. That's my, because there hasn't been an annual inflation for the last 5 years. So we're playing a little catch up here, part of it as well, because we haven't been inflating it for the last.
And if you'll remember, the study gets updated every 5 years.
So we'll be coming back in 4 years.
Sure. That's why I think, Jeff, that's part of the big pop from 17 to today is the fact that we haven't been inflating it at all. And even at your 1% or 2% inflation that you've seen, you know, we'll play a little catch up on top of catching up for the lack of inventory.
At what point in the process are we already, I mean, this has already been a favorable recommendation from our Parks Board. The issues that we raised earlier in the conversation about existing acreage that is available to the community, just not on the Bargersville inventory. Is that something that now we have to wait 5 years before that's addressed? Or is that something that can be amended based upon a recommendation either here or in the town council?
In my opinion, it'd be something that you could start discussion on. I'm not sure it's going to change the impact fee unless the school says we're going to donate this money and it's going to be part of your deed.
Because it has to be on the town's inventory.
Again, you have to seek legal, my interpretation from everything I've heard has to be part of the towns and municipalities oversight.
Yeah. I mean, that logically makes sense.
Yeah. But again, it even if it takes 4 years to work out something, and in the meantime, you can get access to it, it may slow down your pace a little bit, the need for it. Then we could recap it and, in 4 years with a little bit more substance.
And there's no way to prioritize a 5-acre park versus 5 acres of trail. From a standpoint of the community's desire to have 5 acres of trail, which goes a long way versus a 5-acre park that you pull up to and it's.
Well, it'd be my hope that in the future, we get off just these two inventory, just trails, and that we start looking at, where impact fees could be used for other physical components that go on the land that you've been purchasing over the last several years. So it's not just, it'd be my hope that in either the next study or the one after that it gets beyond just the trails and the park open space land, that you start looking at ball fields, playgrounds, and so on, because those are going to, the inventory of far as what's going on in that and those standards, those are going to become current needs and future needs as well.
I understand again, based upon the draft ordinance, the fund that is going to be created by virtue of collecting these fees is not limited to just purchasing the land. It's also going to be used for capital improvements on it, correct?
Well, what capital improvements?
Put playground equipment on it.
No, because playground is a separate line item.
So this is just.
This is strictly.
That's another language issue in the ordinance because
Well,
it says capital improvements.
Unless the capital improvements is,
We'll be happy to discuss those separately, but this fund is specifically for the 2A priorities, which are purchasing land
And trails.
The other park capital improvements fund, which is a completely separate funding source, can be used for building playgrounds or pickleball courts or tennis courts or whatever those are.
Yeah, I mean, you see what my disconnect is. This is remarkable, and this needs to come out of here with a favorable recommendation, in my opinion. This is something different.
Happy to address those with you.
That was the disconnect. So what you need tonight is a recommendation to the planning commission to ask for a favorable recommendation on this.
And I believe you have a resolution in your packets.
So a motion to adopt the resolution approving the impact fee ordinance. Which is a summarized version of the actual title.
And from the standpoint of addressing Mr. Sittmeyer's concern relating the actual resolution, we don't want to make any reference to that in the motion as to whether we want to,
I would
any
recommend that
review,
you not.
anything, okay. Just, it'll be noted in the minutes of this meeting. Anyone that would like to make a motion?
Let's see, I would like to make a motion to recommend that we adopt the resolution for approving the impact fee for Bargersville Recreation.
Properly stated, is that legal? Okay.
I'll second.
So we reached for it. I think you beat me.
I don't care, you can have it once. We have multiple seconds.
I second that motion.
Hey, we have a first and a second. Do we have any further questions about the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, answering audibly?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
5.
Did you, yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
We don't have any old business tonight, so we can move on to our new business item, if the commission's ready, which is docket DEV-270-2020, Sundown Gardens Development Plan. The petitioner is requesting development plan approval to construct a garden center and nursery. The subject property is located in the 4300 block of North State Road 135. The property is zone C3, the petitioner's Westland Investments. Just a quick summary of the site history. This property was rezoned back last October to C3 with commitments. Those commitments were restricting uses as well as maintaining an existing southern fence line and tree line. The BZA in January approved an outdoor storage accessory use for the retail garden center and nursery use, and as well as 4 development standards variances. These were to permit up to 65% maximum parking in the front yard, permit glass, metal, polycarbonate, and wood as exterior building materials on the greenhouses, construct accessory structure in the front yard, and permit gravel as a driveway material for the eastern access drive and this outdoor storage areas respectively. This site plan, you can see in your packets and on your screen for your reference, is complying with those variance requests. It's a 24-acre site planned to be served by a public sewer and private water well for irrigation and the drinking water. There is just under 10,000 square foot retail garden center proposed, greenhouse buildings, and other structures and outdoor inventory display and sale areas on the property. The zoning ordinance requires commercial greenhouse uses to provide 3 parking spaces plus 1 space per 350 square feet of usable floor area. The garden center's usable floor area, is 6,500 square feet. So ordinance would require 22 total parking spaces. The petitioner has proposed 43 total spaces, so that's an excess of 49 spaces. So this is something that the ordinance, when a site plan is exceeding 10%, the Plan Commission has to specifically approve that excess parking. So that would be a component that the Plan Commission would need to consider and officially approve with the site plan. The proposed landscaping plan conforms to the requirements of the zoning ordinance, the landscaping chapter, and the arterial corridor overlay district. The staff and the technical advisory committee reviewed this and identified some concerns with the drainage, which may impact the overall site design, which is what is leading. Joe will get some more information on that. But that is why staff is recommending that the Plan Commission continue the development plan to the December 20th, 2021 meeting, so that revisions can be submitted and reviewed by the technical advisory committee.
So I'll do my best to explain our drainage concerns. I'm not an engineer by choice. Nothing against the engineers. From my understanding, our discussions with our reviewing engineer, well, I'll back up a step. Number 2 on your standards for approval in your staff reports is drainage, and it is to ensure that drainage will not cause any adverse effects on neighboring properties. This drainage design outlets into the 135 ditch and flows south toward the Bargersville Church of Christ. As you all know, there's a wet area and an existing drainage issue in that ditch. That, along with some depressional storage that has been identified on the property that wasn't accounted for in the drainage design, leads us into our concerns of what this drainage is going to look like when those things are addressed. We don't have any doubt that they'll be addressed. I don't think there's anything that is insurmountable, but is what this design and what this pond looks like after those items are addressed. Any questions of staff?
Is the thinking that the pond needs to be bigger, or that is?
I think that's some of the contemplation. Is the pond bigger? Is it deeper? Does the outlet change? Is there downstream work that's necessary to make this outlet viable?
I have a procedural question. Based on the staff giving us their presentation, I know from a development plan standpoint, we can approve with condition, or deny, or obviously, if it's going to continue a public hearing, that requires a motion and vote. The motion and vote to continue the public hearing, we can do that at any time. We don't have to start the public hearing, or
Correct.
if we went through the public hearing tonight to that process to allow us to hear the public, can we still continue the public hearing for the next meeting?
Yes, you can.
And we can have another public
And then
hearing?
you just need to decide whether you want to require notice for the second hearing.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Only one is required. A
Okay.
notice was given for tonight, but
And you can take public comment without requiring additional notice.
Okay, right.
And the petitioner's here.
Yeah.
I believe they have a presentation. He's probably has a lot more information than I do.
Sure.
On the drainage.
Okay, thank you.
So you can click right on the.
Thanks, Chelsea. Good evening, Brian Cross with Civil Site Group, offices at 718 Adams Street, Carmel, Indiana. I'm here tonight on behalf of the petitioner, Westland Investments and Sundown Gardens. Joining me here in the public hearing as well, partnership and ownership of Sundown Gardens as well. So we're going to jump to this portion of the public presentation that we prepared. Chelsea did a great job introducing the project and the history behind it with the rezone and the BZA hearing approvals previously last year. So moving forward to the development plan, the 24-acre property is located, roughly about 3,000 feet south of Whiteland Road on the east side of 135. That site plan, one again, Chelsea had pulled up earlier. This one's a little bit updated from the one she had in her slideshow. It just shows the pedestrian connectivity, some of the changes that were implemented because of the TAC review comments related to the site itself, adding some more detailed dimensions. The ordinance requires pedestrian frontage, sidewalk, and connectivity to the actual building. So we've shown that along 135. One thing also to note on 135 is there is going to be a driveway permit and improvement with an additional lane shift for this development and this driveway. That is under review with NDOT under a separate driveway permit application. We have met with NDOT over a year ago. We've vetted out the traffic engineering analysis even before we went through the rezone process. So we have a lot of data and collaborative responses from NDOT before even filing the driveway permit. Landscape plan, I'm not sure that was in Chelsea's slideshow there, but just gives you an idea of the density and the location of landscaping. Sundown Gardens being a premier landscape company, nursery, they will do all their installation. It'll look as beautiful as the one does in Westfield. You can get on their website and check out what they've got there. It's a showcase. There's a reason for it to be a showcase because obviously they want the community to shop there and build the same type of a venue around their home, their homescape, their businesses. Architecturally, these are updated elevations, an isometric view of the main building, the garden center, retail area. So it does have a kind of an entry there, covered awnings with patio areas. It's not designed to be, a CVS or Walgreens or a brick structure like that. There's certain components that does meet the architectural requirements, but again, it's to be inviting to be a garden center. You've also got, some elevations of where the greenhouses will be on the north side of the building and different elevations there to the east and the west. So talking about drainage, and I am an engineer, and sometimes wish I wouldn't have been an engineer. Speak on the architecture method, But this is the GIS map from Johnson County. It shows you the legal drains to the south and to the east. The property's highlighted there. Very, very faintly on this exhibit, you can see a red dashed line that runs down the 135 right-of-way. And I've personally spent a lot of time, you probably saw me out there in a safety vest and dodging traffic, trying to learn more about this, the drainage concerns that the review consultant has with the town. We don't feel the same way. We do agree with Joe's comment that it can be overcome. There's not great challenges that can't be, overcome whatsoever. But let's just talk about, topography in this situation. These did not turn out as well on the overhead slides. So the county contouring map, it just gives you a better idea of what's going on with the property. This is the survey. North is to your left. So we do have an area of the front of the property that drains out to the 135 right-of-way currently. And that's consistently draining out to the right-of-way. And again, this is a farm field right now. Was it planted in beans or corn this year?
Beans.
Beans, okay. So they have been harvested. I walked the entire property when I was out there last week as well. So that runoff from the front 1/3 of the property is identified here in the existing condition exhibit. So you got 5 or so acres that drains towards 135. And, that is a condition that's already occurring today. Now, the question is, from the review consultant for the town was identifying, is that a viable outlet? So when you look at the right-of-way, the left picture there identifies looking northward, and there is a culvert for a field access into that property. There's a 24-inch culvert in there right now. And then that swale to the right of that slide picture, that's looking southward, and that is the drainage swale going south. You will also identify a pipeline marker that CenterPoint Energy has a 6-inch gas main running along the east side of 135. So we've identified that. We're working with CenterPoint on location of improvements with the traffic improvements, lane improvements to avoid that gas main and any relocations that might occur because of that. So these are pictures from last week, so they're very, very current. The left picture on this slide is looking northward along that same ditch as the drainage flows south. This is across the Munchell property, directly south of our property. And the right picture is the culvert pipe outlet still going south further towards the veterinarian clinic. So there's definitely a defined drainage swale, going that direction. Is it in perfect condition? No. Is it ever going to be in perfect condition? No. But there's some maintenance issues, and those are things that can be easily overcome. One of them, if you can kind of see in this culvert down by the veterinarian clinic, there's a 5-gallon bucket stuck in that dry culvert there. So, things like that can definitely be overcome. The right picture there, that is further down south towards the fire station, and that is the point where the water diverges with a box culvert under 135 into this beehive inlet and a pipe over to the legal drain. So this is the naturally flowing condition of the area and the watershed right now. That's how our water, from going backwards to that 5 acres that drains off the front portion of our site, leaves our site and goes south. Now, from a drainage design, INDOT requires us the same release rates that the Bargersville ordinance requires, the 100-year post-developed to the 10-year existing, and the 10-year post-developed to the 2-year existing. So we are greatly reducing the amount, the drainage flow rates going to that ditch. So as long as we meet those requirements, then in our discussions with INDOT previously, they did not have a problem, with that part of it, as long as we meet those required allowable release rates for the ordinances. And what's unique in this situation is that both Bargersville's ordinance and the state's are the same. So it's in alignment there. So the question really is, the concern on the viable outlet there. There are challenges to overcome with maintenance. That's honestly my only concern. Are we going to meet the allowable release rates required by ordinance? Yes, we are. Going back to your question, does that mean that the pond gets bigger, or if I had that's traffic. We'll go back to the site plan. So that's possible. We might be revising the eastern portion of the pond maybe to get a little bit bigger to detain more water. One of the things I want to emphasize here, this site's challenging to design even as an agricultural field. But when you look at the post-developed conditions going into the detention pond, you create that storage. The storage in this particular pond in a 100-year event is only raising less than 2 feet. So we already have a massive pond already. We need the dirt from the pond to build up the site on the northern portion for the building pads, and we're going to have the exterior and shopping area. So there's a push and pull on land development when you look at what you have to do for drainage as well as prepare the site for the best possible solution. So we are working through those concerns. Again, they're not insurmountable. One of the other items that go back to this one. So the town's consultant brought up the idea of why don't you just take all your drainage to the east and tie into the drain there. That's a viable option. It's not a very inexpensive option. It's a very expensive option. So looking at what's already allowed for the front of the site, we are over detaining because we're only releasing what we can in the existing condition here, even though our development exceeds that acreage, we're probably about 8 acres of disturbed area, 11 probably at the most. 11 acres of the 24 acres being disturbed, but we're only releasing the 5 acres of existing condition and reducing it. So I've done a lot of drainage design in central Indiana, 2 projects in Bargersville, Sycamore Mallow Run, Stones Crossing Health Pavilion on 135. So definitely have some experience with the ordinance and working with the town's consultant. And this is the normal path that we go through. We submit a project, we get some concerns, and we go back and forth with that part of it. It will be handled. And again, I think the biggest thing is just looking at maintenance. That's an easy one there. You know, you get the 5-gallon bucket out of that one. That particular area there where the Beehive Inlet then drains to the east, that'll be an ongoing maintenance issue for the watershed, just to be able to, you know, make sure that that is free flowing there.
The bucket wasn't holding something up, was it?
No. Actually, I was concerned there was maybe some rodents in there, so, you know, I had to step back and take a picture. But, and then just real briefly, I had it on the slide here, was related to traffic. So we did a traffic engineering analysis over a year ago, collaborated with NDOT on this. And this is where it goes back to, is there a left turn warrant or is there a right turn lane warrant? In this particular land use and the number of vehicles, there is not a right turn lane warrant into the actual property. There is a left turn lane warrant just because of the opposing traffic in different AM and PM peak hours. But you're only queuing 1 vehicle. So it's right on the borderline. So rather than fight that part of it, it meets the NDOT criteria. Therefore, we're working with NDOT, and you'll see on that site plan, you'll see a 1 vehicle stacking with a decel, you know, into the entrance there. And the reason why we're doing the lane shift and bringing everything to the east side of the road is because of those monstrosity power poles, 79,000 kVA power along the west side. So normally a development like this, we're looking at doing a passing blister, but when you start moving 8 of those power poles, you don't develop this property. So yes, there's challenges with this, but I think we're almost there to overcome them. I'm happy to answer any more questions, provide any more details or insight.
Questions for the petitioner? Or the petitioner's representative? Okay, thank you. This time, I'd like to open the public hearing for docket BEV 000-270-2020 Sundown Gardens Development Plan. Anybody like to speak, just come up and give your name and address, and we'll collect the notes and everything, and then when we're done, we'll make sure item by item and question by question, we'll get the petitioner back up here to answer for you.
Okay, I'm Daryl Munchell, 4289 North State Road 135. My property is just right south of the Sundown Gardens proposed property. And you're talking about drainage. I've had a problem with that. I've had water backing up this last summer. Our spring was a really bad wet time, and the ditch south of me was clogged up. I notified Bargersville, and they says, well, it wasn't your problem, it was the state's problem. And so I said, well, I had to contact the state. Well, I'm paying in stormwater with the city, with Bargersville, so I assume it's their problem to call the state, you know, not my problem. So if it's my problem, then why am I paying storms tax? But that's usually, if it was running, it wouldn't have backed water up onto my place. And the only place that really holds water is the front end of my property. I have a holding pond just to the west of my house that I hold most of the water until it gets full, and it can't drain away because the side ditch is backing up water into my property. So, and the southwest corner Sundown's Garden, it floods some only when the side ditch is clogged up. And I lived at my address for 25 years and the state has never cleaned that ditch out at all. So it needs to be maintained. The vet hospital, or that's just south of me, when they built a holding pond on their property. It's on the east of their property, at the east end of their property. And that holding pond has never overflowed or even come close to their, they got a standpipe that drains to the east, to the ditch that's east of them. It's never got within 10 foot of the overflow from their property drainage. So, you keep saying about a drainage problem. Well, if the side ditch is maintained, there's no drainage problem, but it's not being maintained. So, you got to, that's what I'm seeing, what's happening.
Reinforces what the pictures show. When you say the side ditch, the one that goes along the east side of 135 in front of your property.
Yeah, on the east side of 135. I keep, you can see from the pictures, I try and keep mine cleaned up and grass cut. And so there is drainage there, but you get just south of me, the church's property is kind of growed up in grass and is, kind of, higher than my side ditch. And you get on farther south and it gets all kinds of clogged up with debris and stuff.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that closes the public hearing for docket DEP 000-270, 2020 Sundown Gardens Development Plan. I guess I got a question. Whose responsibility is it to take care of the ditch? Seems to be what the petitioner brought up and what Mr. Munchell brought up.
Yeah, the ditch is part of the state right of way. Typically, that's an NDOT responsibility to maintain that ditch. Each individual property owner is responsible for maintaining their own culvert along that ditch, same as you would on a county road. If it's your driveway culvert, you're responsible to maintain that. We have contacted the state regarding that ditch and a number of other ditches along 135. We've received a response of from one of the items we've brought up. This is not the one.
So we should get a hold of our local state representative.
I've been slowly climbing the ladder of NDOT so far.
And I think Mr. Munchell had a question about his stormwater fee that he pays to Bargersville, correct?
Stormwater fees assessed to every property in town.
And what does that go towards? Besides, it doesn't go towards the ditch, obviously.
Yeah, obviously the ditch water actually ends up going somewhere. Ends up going to the waters. The town is required by IDEM to maintain Rule 13 permits, soon to be just the general permit for stormwater maintenance and quality. Towards that fee goes to that permitting, inspections and maintenance that are required with that permitting. Goes to stormwater projects. I believe we're still paying off a bond issue for some stormwater improvements years ago. We're slowly working toward a more comprehensive stormwater project philosophy, if you will. The Stormwater Board is working on a master plan currently to address a lot of these issues and hopefully get a step-by-step plan to improve some of the most flood-plagued areas of the town. Short answer.
I guess a question that I have, Joe, is I'm not actually understanding why we would want to continue this.
Yeah, and we haven't really had a chance to speak since talking with our consulting engineer, and some of the issues are brought up. If it truly is just a maintenance issue, it's not that big of a deal. Like I said, we haven't had a chance to speak. I don't, at the time of writing this report, we didn't know the extent of that. Was that ditch going to be large enough to handle the outflow?
Because if I understand correctly from Mr. Cross, when this development is done, the outflow at the 100-year level is actually handled both by the retention pond and by the existing configuration of the ditch that is along 135.
And that's the requirement of the ordinance.
Yeah, and understood. But what is gained by continuing this another month?
Staff's concern, again, prior to having this discussion this evening, was what impact that might have on the detention facilities and the site itself. Even in the end, if it does have a large impact, changes the site layout, it would be sent back to this board. So staff's thought, that potential was there.
And at what stage in the overall development process would it come back if an issue is detected? Is that further review by Roy? Is that something else happens? Is there another TAC review before that would happen?
There's not a formal TAC review. We do get revisions, send those back out to the agencies that have made comments for additional review. So Roy, being our reviewer on this project, would be the one that would get those revisions and make comments on those.
So based on what you found out today, does staff still recommend we wait until the summertime?
And staff feels a little more comfortable looking at the maintenance issues identified by Primrose. I did that earlier today too. Sundown Gardens. If it is in fact just a maintenance issue, it really looks like it might be, especially with the evidence from the neighbor there. Staff feels a little more comfortable approving this conditionally based on meeting stormwater and additional TAC comments.
In additional TAC.
Yes.
But is it possible that this site plan would change or this development plan would change?
There's always a possibility.
Then I would recommend that you not make a decision this evening until they get that sorted out.
And I want
Sure. I guess I can speak to the dynamic of what might change. So the detention facility might change just by recontouring, creating more stormwater drainage storage, to address some of those, flow concerns that might be in Roy's report. So we had a conference call, Windows team meeting, I think it was November 5th, a Friday. Roy, staff, our team, and it was just to digest what the concerns were from the drainage perspective on the town's, consultant side. And we are going through revisions, this week, and we'll be resubmitting to Roy. So there's a period where you get responses, make some revisions, and those can be calculations in a drainage report. They could be the exhibits that go with it. I do not personally see any changes to the geometry and location of the building, the drive, anything on the north side of the site. The only changes that we would be making would be related to drainage, which would be contouring, elevations, pond configuration. It may not be that exact amoeba. It may be something a little bit differently, but I don't think that those are entirely out of the question, to look for a vote this evening conditional for stormwater utility board approval.
Say the Stormwater Utility Board is going to be the approving authority for any revisions that you make, right?
That's that, and NDOT, and we have to subject to NDOT.
Yeah, NDOT is the maintenance issue. So if
And that also has to prove that.
yeah, I mean, it sounds like the standard language that we use all the time, subject to Stormwater Board approval and resolution of TAC comments.
I don't see anything drastic is going to change. It's not like we're going to move a building around, or the driveway is going to be flipped to the other. I mean, I don't see that as being a change. So
Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same question. If,
That we need to wait?
if the nature of what potentially could change is contouring of the pond, which is subject to stormwater utility board approval, isn't that kind of what we do with contingencies on a regular basis?
It is, but typically changes to the plan are not on the table at this point by the time it gets to you. So that combined with putting staff on the fly, sort of, when they weren't planning on coming up with a substantive recommendation tonight necessarily, gives me pause.
And I guess a little insight into staff's thought process. If the shape and size of the detention should double and cause or change shape in such a way that it changed the parking layout, the building position, the drive layout, something like that, we would consider that a minor change, which happens almost every time.
Yeah. The zoning ordinance outlines major and minor changes to site plan approvals, and so yeah, slight adjustments that can happen are permitted under that minor change, but it could potentially, staff's thought was, or concern was, there could be a major change. And we wanted to potentially avoid any kicking that back after it's been approved conditionally by the Plan Commission. So.
And I can, a little bit more insight into, staff reports. We write these a week in advance, pretty quick after our first meeting. A lot of times there's not a lot of time to turn around some of these comments and have these discussions like this, what really is happening in the downstream. So staff feels it's our responsibility to be a little more conservative on the staff report side, knowing some additional information may come to light in that kind of week.
Are we able to resolve the drainage along 135 when it is an NDOT thing? I mean, we can't make NDOT do anything. So that's just gonna get worse and the problem is still there. I mean.
Well, I can
we're
say.
not responsible for it, you're not responsible for it.
Yeah. Well, I can say we have an active NDOT driveway permit application with them. And in our application is the drainage release to the right of way. So we're going to be actively working with their engineers on what our expectations are, and we can relay those to NDOT, have them to relay those to their maintenance department, and try to resolve that in a more expeditious way with this petition.
I think you just found your connection with NDOT, Joe, to get it redone.
If I'm Mr. Muncher, and I'm right there next to it, correct? The detention or retention, however you want to define it, pond is gonna make the outflow across my property, it's gonna make it less.
It should.
It's gonna be better
By design, it should improve.
by design.
Should improve.
But downstream of him is where you notated
Yes,
the maintenance.
yes.
So not his, because when I'm looking at an aerial, a lot of those issues we had south. So when we do that permit with NDOT, I mean, when we put in a request, they just come through and maintain it once and then say bye and then they don't come
Well,
back or?
NDOT has an inspector assigned to each permit in
Okay.
the different districts. This is the Seymour district. So that inspector is going to be working with me through the entire permit process. I will personally bring it up to him. He will make a site visit to review the site in relationship to the site plan. Sometimes they even ask us to put survey stakes out there to give them, with a large property like this, they don't know exactly where the drive is going. So there's going to be some dialogue there. I think the expectation that we would have is to work the system with NDOT to make sure they understand that downstream maintenance is needed.
Yeah.
Yes. And we'll get the 5-gallon bucket out, no problem.
Yes, sir.
Bring animal control.
Somewhere NDOT has 135 changing to a 3-lane, 4-lane, 5-lane road or something, that was supposed to have been done, well, it should have been done by now, and they keep backing the, plans for that off. So I can see 4 or 5 years down the road, while traffic is increasing on 135, that all this drainage is going to change to the better.
Yeah.
And as you know, here, 3 or 4 years, they put a new culvert through on 135, just, a quarter of a mile south or down by the fire station to handle more water. So, this might all change in 4 or 5 years, that there won't be a problem of drainage along there, so.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Commissioner? You would like to make a motion?
Well, I'm trying to be responsive to what council is saying about the issues. Because my inclination is to move to approve with contingencies that tech comments are addressed, that stormwater utility board approval is reached. And I even was trying to wordsmith some language around NDOT approval of the driveway permit, which also addresses drainage issues.
And if there
So
ends
build
up,
the contingencies in.
and if there ends up being a major change, they're gonna have to come back.
They have to come back anyway, is that correct? If there's a major change.
And they always would have to go back, any other project that we've done this on with these same stormwater and TAC comments, there's always that risk, maybe inherently smaller in those than in this situation, but.
Until it's in the ground, there's always a chance it'll change.
And I'm also listening to two different comments that Joe made, that this happens virtually every time. And that he is less concerned, having heard the presentation and the relationship of the maintenance issues, correct?
Correct.
I'm inclined to do it.
You making a motion?
I need to see them ask for the.
And just as a reminder, if the commission or a commissioner is going to offer a motion on the site plan to approve it, the commission needs to also consider the excess parking and vote on that. So I just wanted to remind the commission about that.
So that probably needs to be decided first, is that correct?
And that was, I apologize, I keep adding statements to, I should have summarized this all in the first place, but the excess parking, again, the ordinance is based upon the retail space of the building, but the nature of this business is seasonal. Therefore, you have a whole outdoor garden area where people are shopping for plants, trees, flowers, different things. So when you look at the front portion of the development, that outdoor sales area in the seasonal side, spring and summer and fall, you're going to need that extra parking. That's why it's there. A lot of different ordinances and different municipalities address the parking based upon seasonal and retail, areas. So I don't know if Bargersville specifically addresses that on seasonal, but that's just the nature of this business. The Westfield location has a very similar amount of parking spaces, and it works very well.
And so hypothetically, if we were to continue still voting on that matter, isn't necessarily contingent on the other, we could take care of that regardless, correct? The parking matter?
The excess parking.
Does that do us any good?
Not
Hypothetically.
really.
Yeah, I'd say if we're gonna continue, yeah.
Okay.
We just continue the whole
But
thing.
if the plan is to approve, then we need to do both, we would need to do it separately. And the parking would need to go.
Is it one motion? We can do one motion, include both.
You can do one motion.
I did not print this out. No, this right here.
And your standard for approving the excess parking is to determine that the parking is necessary based on documented evidence to accommodate the use on a typical day.
Do we have documented evidence?
I'm not sure. Not sure that you do.
Did we get evidence of that?
Not specifically, no.
Do you have evidence of that?
What kind of evidence are we, when we say evidence, what are we looking for?
Well, what I would offer is that the seasonal area out front, is roughly 15,000 square feet, comprised of the outdoor sales area and the pathways and the nursery stock. So proportionally to the 6,500 square feet of retail space, that's the ordinance is basing the parking count off of, and greenhouse space. The ordinance requires 22 spaces required. We're proposing 45. So a 23 vehicle buffer there for the seasonal use of an additional 15,000 square feet of space of outdoor area and sales.
If you'd thrown a roof over the top of that, talking, you've got 15,000 square feet, in theory, you'd be required to over double your parking.
If it was building usable floor area,
Yeah.
that would be 45 spaces alone.
Over 60 or 70 spaces required.
Yeah, that's the hiccup. It's right here in our packet. Staff has not received specific documented evidence addressing the access parking.
Why is adding excess parking not a good thing?
The excess parking provision is mostly to try and reduce impervious surface for the town, and which would then, increase drainage problems and.
But those calculate, aren't those all, with as a part of the site plan is going to go into the calculations, right? As far as the detention pond and everything?
Correct.
Yeah, it's not like it's not being in the calculation of the water level.
The idea of a parking maximum like that, or excess parking maximum, goes toward impervious area and water quality, obviously, but it also goes toward thermal mass, heat retention, things like that go a little bit beyond simply stormwater.
I just don't know what other evidence they're gonna bring back. If we continue.
Are you expecting a report from them, or what is that?
I mean, what Ellen read to us is here in our packet also. In approving excess parking spaces, the plan commission shall determine that the parking is necessary based on documented evidence to accommodate the use on a typical day. That's the criteria.
In the site plan that's presented, is not enough documented evidence? I guess I'm just asking the question. Right. I mean, I don't know, do we need to have?
I don't know what we would be requesting of them that would be considered documented evidence.
That's what I was asking.
I think maybe this is a question for legal, is the statement on the record in the minutes
In addition to the site plan, enough for documented evidence.
Yeah, I mean, he's under oath, so I can make that argument. I think this might be the only section in the ordinance requiring documented evidence. That's just not a normal.
That sounds all right.
I would also offer the opportunity for Brian Kirshner, who's owner and operator of Sundown Gardens. He could testify under oath, what the business operations in that specific area, providing the evidence you need, if you would be willing to hear that.
Size-wise, this one to the other one, what is the difference? I mean, are they comparable, or is one going to be a lot bigger than this,
This is a little bit smaller on the greenhouse count. That's about it.
No.
There's 4 greenhouses. Come on up, Brian.
How about how about parking there?
Oh, you didn't stand up?
I did not stand up.
Oh, well, thank you. Let me get my notes. Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to give, raise your right hand, is the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Brian Kirshner from Sundown Gardens, live at 1359 Trifecta Way in Westville, Indiana. To understand the nature of our business, first of all, our garden center that we built up there, when we designed that property, it was designed to handle our landscape operation. Our landscape operation was much greater. So we built a small garden center. The square footage of inside our garden shop up there is about 2,200 square feet. We did not have a greenhouse when we initially started that up there. And the greenhouse that we have now is 64 by 98. Then we have another addition that was added on as we've gone through the process, as we've grown. My wife talked me into building it, and she's done very well growing this thing. So what we did was when we chose to come to Johnson County, we were looking at a need. There's nothing like this down here. The nature of our business is right now we would be begging for you guys to all show up to buy something. It's not a typical retail business that it's constant throughout the season. What happens is you get to about mid-April through about mid-June is our busiest time. And on a weekend, we could have a full parking lot. During the week, we might have half a parking lot. This time of the year, we may have 3 cars at a time in the parking lot. It's just the nature of our business. So most people are buying their flowers and plants, and getting their lawn looking good, April, May, first part of June. And then when summer hits, no one wants to work in the yard when it's 90 degrees. And then fall rolls around. And then in September, October, it's busy again. So that's how our business ebbs and flows. January, you'll be lucky to even see a car in the parking lot. It's that slow. So in our garden center, we wanted to build something big enough to do it right this time around. I would have built that big of a garden center on the north side if I knew that we were going to be this successful. So.
Thank you. How many parking spaces do you have up there then, just for?
We have 44 spots for the retail and then like another, I think it's 25 for the landscape portion of our business.
Similar number to what you guys are proposing here then.
For the garden center side, it's almost identical within, I think, a spot. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I think we'll go to that resolution on council. That's for motion.
I'm gonna take a shot.
If you can't do it now, it's
Mr. President, I would move to approve docket DEV 270-2020 Sundown Gardens Development Plan, approving the petitioner's proposed excess parking to 43 spaces with the following contingencies: that all TAC comments have been addressed, that stormwater utility board approval has been granted, and that NDOT approves the driveway permit, which will include drainage assessment. That captured
everything I seconded. Not hearing or
Julie's nodding.
And I got one thumbs up from the back corner.
Okay, we have a first and you second.
I second it.
Does anybody have any questions about, or any members of the commission have any questions about the motion that was made and seconded? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
That was probably one of the best collaborative petitioner plan commission hearings I've been to in a long time. Not including the COVID thing either. I mean, really. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, next item.
All right. Our next new business item is, we've got a couple findings of fact for you. First up is the plat-333-2021 Crump primary plat. This is page 54 in your packets, is an item for your approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the findings of fact for plat 333-2021.
I'll second that.
Have a first and a second. Any questions? All in favor, please answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Next one is plat-334-2021 Commerce Grove primary plat findings of fact.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the findings of fact for docket plat 334-2021.
I'll second that.
First and a second, any questions? All in favor, please respond by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
All right. We have our monthly Development Department project update. Happy to answer any specific questions if the board has any. And that's page 57 in your packets.
Can I bring up a discussion item?
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a really neat trip this last Friday. There was some members of the council, members of the RDC, members of the planning commission. We met here, we went to Whitestown, Westfield, Zunville, Carmel, and Fishers. And it was very productive, so I just wanted to thank staff and everybody that kind of participated in that. Yeah, it was real beneficial, and I'm excited about the RDC and that group becoming more active and more purposeful and helping the community grow, as well as the planning commission too. So it was a positive trip.
Very nicely done, too.
So that was my.
It was very well.
I got stuck in the back of the bus, all cramped.
You did have
Yeah, I got razzed.
I had a really nice seat.
Other than that, it was awesome.
Food was good, so.
Any other discussion items? It's exciting though, right now.
Yeah.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Turn it off.
I need signatures for the resolution on here.
From all of us?